Where are you coming from? We're heading to.
We're right at DOT headquarters at the moment. Things are good, very lively right now as we dig into the negotiations on the jobs plan.
Well, let's talk about that jobs plan. Can you walk me through from the transportation perspective why this jobs plan is so important for states like Texas?
Yeah, so the American Jobs Plan is a vision to create millions of jobs and set up our economy to win the future. And a big part of that is through investments in things like transportation infrastructure. I think most Americans already see the need for us to improve our roads and bridges. In Texas, for example, there are hundreds of bridges and nearly 20,000 miles of road and highway that are rated in poor condition. It's unacceptable in the United States of America, and it demonstrates the consequences of failing to invest over the years. Now we can do something about that. And when we do, we're going to create millions of good paying jobs, most of which are available whether you have a college degree or not. We think this is how we set up America to succeed for the long run. It's roads and bridges, it's ports and airports, things like that, but also an expanded definition of infrastructure, because things like internet access are as important as access to the interstate highway system in today's times to be able to win in the economy. And of course, things like power in the grid, as all of America saw because of what happened to Texas in the winter. We need to recognize that our power infrastructure is critical infrastructure and needs to have real, serious, major federal investment.
In what ways, Mr. Secretary, are the state efforts to improve power infrastructure, roadway infrastructure, ports, et cetera, hand in hand with the federal efforts? How do those run together?
Yeah, well, in our system, a lot of leadership comes from the local level and the state level. And then that has to partner with the resources that come from the federal level. We're not going to develop all of the answers in Washington. That's not the role of the federal government. The solutions don't all have to come from Washington, but more of the funding should. There are levels of complexity and just size on some of the projects that need to be done around the country that call for nationwide investment. That's how we built the interstate highway system. That's how we got a transcontinental railroad in this country. And that's what it's going to take to make the upgrades that are needed. My department works daily, hand in hand, with state and local authorities on grants, on permits, on everything we need to have a strong system. And this is the president saying we've got to make decisions as a country rather than expecting every community to be able to solve it on their own, by offering the kind of resources that are really going to catapult us to the next level. Remember, other countries are not hesitating to make these kinds of investments. You look at our allies, look at our competitors, look at a place like China and the huge sums of money that they're investing because they know this will help them compete and win. The president wants America to compete and win the future.
Have you had any specific conversations with leadership in Texas at the local level or at the state level about expansion of some of those key thoroughfares like I-35, like I-27, to help not only just improve trade and transportation, but also the communities that are around those thoroughfares?
Yes, I've had great conversations with mayors from around the state of Texas and, of course, congressional representatives here in Washington who I speak with often as we're shaping the next steps for the jobs plan. And what I'm hearing is a real sense of urgency, especially when you have big, wide open spaces like Texas does, as well as big, densely populated cities that are experiencing a lot of growth. Growth is a good thing, but it creates a lot of problems and challenges if you're in the business of maintaining infrastructures. There's increased demand. In some cases, that means we need to upgrade and enhance our highways. In other cases, if you just make the highway wider, you're just going to get more cars. So we've got to be smart about giving people alternatives so that cars can travel efficiently and safely, but also so that you have great transit resources and options that you might not need the car for certain kinds of trips. All of those things have to fit together. And what we want are solutions that are going to work for Texans in their day-to-day lives, getting to school, getting to work, getting to around the community, wherever you need to be. And that requires real resources. But let me be clear, we can afford this. In fact, I would argue we can't afford not to do this. And the plan that the president is putting forward is fully paid for.
I'd like to know a little bit more about how the administration and the Department of Transportation are planning to promote air quality while also trying to reconcile and maintain, the vehicular use of our roadways every day.
Well, one of the things that we're pursuing are improvements in emissions on two fronts. First of all, the auto industry, being prodded by strong federal standards, it has done remarkable work in improving the efficiency and reducing the pollution that comes out of tailpipes. But now we're also moving to vehicles that have zero emissions at all. That's what's so exciting about electric vehicles. And we want to make sure that those electric vehicles that clearly represent the future are going to be made in the U.S. by American workers on American soil at American companies. That won't just happen on its own. We got to make some decisions. That's one of the reasons why the president's plan includes a nationwide network of 500,000 charging stations, so that no matter how long your daily trips are, you can be confident that you're going to be able to charge up. The implications that this has in terms of air quality and in terms of climate more generally are so compelling, but it's also another example of a jobs creation opportunity.
Some of the conversations that we're having, especially in Texas right now, are about sort of the bigger picture with oil and gas as it relates to not only just the climate aspect of what we're talking about, but the physical roadway infrastructure. You know, some of these big trucks that are constantly on the roadways and causing wear and tear, and also, you know, there's some specific state legislation that's aiming to address that. I want to ask you about, you know, what the strong oil and gas industry here in Texas, what role that plays in the bigger transportation picture.
So the energy industry is gearing up for an enormous amount of change. I don't think that's anything to be afraid of if we make the right choices now to make sure that we're supporting, especially those workers who are in the energy field. And look, we're going to need a strong energy industry for even more in the future that we're seeking to create. But there are going to be a lot of ways we have to adapt, new sources of energy, different patterns of distribution on everything from electricity to the way that we get cars fueled up. These changes are coming, and the only question is whether we're going to be ready or not. The president's plan invests not only billions in things like improving our roads, but also things like research. That's incredibly important. Just the other day, I saw a lab funded partly with our support that is directly testing the impact of wheels on wear and tear of the roads, coming up with better materials, because we shouldn't be doing everything the same way over and over again, especially given the resilience challenges that we know we face and that, again, Texas has demonstrated, as every part of the country is seeing in some way, shape, or form.
Mr. Secretary, what is holding this plan back right now? Are there any roadblocks, whether in Texas or otherwise, that are preventing this from getting to its fullest potential that you see it?
Well, in order for the plan to be a success, we need, of course, for it to pass through Congress, get to the president's desk, and then it'll fall to my department and the other departments to go out there and execute. We're ready to do that once we get the resources, but first we need Congress to act. That's why I'm speaking to members of Congress literally every day. We're talking to members from both parties and both chambers. Not that long ago was at another meeting in the Oval Office that the president convened with Republicans and Democrats from the Senate and the House, working on how to get this done and open to conversations about how to refine it, how to improve it, how to get as much support as possible. But let's remember, the American people want this to happen. What we don't have to do is somehow convince America that we need big infrastructure investments. This is already something that has enormous support among Americans. We just got to get Washington to catch up to that. And sometimes that does take a pretty heavy lift for folks like me, really walking through the details with members of Congress.
Sir, I know that there are some conversations that have floated around about the idea that transportation has racism built into it, with roadways that divide communities, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and how we can work as a society, but also you in your role in the Biden administration can work to change that.
Yeah, there is a troubled history of highways being used, sometimes intentionally, to create barriers, to segregate neighborhoods or communities, or even as an instrument to clear out often black and brown neighborhoods with no regard for their well-being and less regard than you might think for what the right answer was in terms of transportation. I think it's very important to understand that history, to understand that that's a risk in projects that are being proposed even today, but also that we can do something about that. I'm not raising this issue in order to make people feel guilty. I'm raising this issue in order to make clear that this time around we have to do better, and we can if we're smart about using our investments to reconnect those communities that were divided, to create better options for people to get safely to where they need to be, and to make sure that that benefits everyone. That's the road towards stronger communities overall. And that's why equity deserves to be a central part of our transportation vision, and it is in the American Jobs Plan.
But just more broadly on some of the physical steps that your office can take or has taken with Texas leaders to help bolster some of the I guess the physical systems in Texas in light of what happened in the winter storm that we faced here. Can you walk me through what steps are being taken to help ensure that Texans are protected moving forward?
Yeah, so several things. First of all, we have grant programs, one called RAISE, that's Rebuilding American Infrastructure for Sustainability and Equity. They love acronyms here in Washington. Another is INFRA, which is a set of infrastructure grants, which are available to local communities with a view toward things like enhancing sustainability, as well as considerations of equity and just modernizing our infrastructure. Those have been ongoing, and we've got applications right now that we're sorting through. We're also just doing a lot of listening with Texan leaders, spoken to a number of mayors, and as I mentioned earlier, congressional representatives on how to make sure the bill we're shaping right now, as we're looking at enhancing our airports and ports and our roads and bridges and everything else in our trains and transit, that is done with a view toward the unique issues and challenges that Texas faces. There are remarkable things going on there, from the proposal for high-speed rail between Dallas and Houston to projects that individual communities are undertaking in Austin. There was a community effort that the city took a vote to raise the revenue needed to implement bigger transportation improvements. We view our role as reinforcing the best things that happen, as well as checking to make sure nothing goes wrong. And we've been in touch with Texas Department of Transportation about concerns with I-35, for example, and making sure that that unfolds in a way that's not just lawful, but beneficial for everybody. So these are the kinds of things that we do day in, day out, making sure that the federal government is a partner to communities in places across Texas and across the U.S. Again, so many of the best solutions actually come from the bottom up, from communities, not from here in Washington. But more of the dollars need to come from Washington to help those communities thrive.
One of the ideas that has been supported from the bottom up in terms of infrastructure is some of these coastal protection projects that have been talked about for several generations now, but every time we see that severe weather and we see those hurricanes, the conversation gets brought up again. And as we prepare for another season of extreme weather, what is the Biden administration and your level of support for coastal protection projects like the Ike Dike?
So one of the reasons why you'll see specific dollars for resiliency projects in the president's proposal is that we see things like this going on around how to deal with water, how to keep it out, or how to manage the way it flows, some of which falls beyond my department. The Army Corps of Engineers is leading a lot of the work on that, but that we want to be supportive whenever there's a what you might call a twofer, where we're doing something smart with roadway infrastructure, for example, or a bridge. It needs to be connected to something around a dike or other water management strategy. Look, we are past the point of pretending that nothing's going on in terms of our weather and climate. We're seeing more frequent and more severe events. And so many of those are hitting Texas hard. And no matter how good we are at battling climate issues and stopping it from getting worse than it has to be, we got to respond to what's going on right now. And that's absolutely part of what we mean when we talk resilience in this administration.